this conversation is a brief overview of the issues to consider when working online with a person who may or have a current or previous trauma history. So working online is a new normal for many of us, given the global lockdown that we currently face. So as it happens, that it's worth bearing in mind that, many people will find that anxiety provoking in itself. And technology brings about further anxieties for some people who are not familiar with, may not have used this medium before, and also those who find themselves marginalised by this technology. So just to start for a moment, considering how non-Apple product users or owners feel when offered FaceTime as a solution to provide a service. Consider those who don't have unlimited data, can't afford financially to pay for or use the internet, and what may be evoked in users of technology or non-users of technology. So there's much to be considered in terms of how services carry out online work, and bearing in mind the sociological, financial, economic landscapes that are in the current crisis as well. We have to bear in mind that many media outlets and platforms suggest or create an illusion that all children are able to use technology, and adults as well, mainly children, and that some children are disadvantaged for many reasons, some of which might be the places they live, whether technology allows for any disabilities or difficulties they may have, for example, sight, hearing, special needs, language skills. So in moving to online work, we as practitioners and services need to account for our own privileges in and around technology. Bearing in mind there's a gradient within those practitioners of the technological capabilities of the person themselves. So moving towards the theory and talking about working with anxious, stressed or traumatized individuals using online mediums, it's worth noting some propositions, considerations for how we behave, react, respond using this technology. And it's in doing this that I'm going to kind of move to the cognitive aspect and then talk about why working with traumatized people actually comes from a biological standpoint. So it's more biopsychosocial. So John Suler in 2004 proposed that whilst using technology, people engage in what he called online disinhibition, which ranges from benign through to toxic. And there's 6 principles that underpin this. Underpin his proposition. I'll put the link to his article below, and you can read that yourself in your own time. It's the most cited work used in online training courses, but I'm going to add to this with areas from my research and theory that can be of help, especially as we're looking to work with those who might find this technology daunting, evocative, intrusive, and further anxiety provoking. Okay, so let's begin with some simple reflections on those with trauma, anxiety, elevated stress. So I'm not going to go deep into the theory or detail, but those who have a stress response, it's helpful to know that what these people will be doing is looking for regulation via an online medium at the moment for most people. And much of this biological stuff underpins my theory. So I'll hopefully get to give you a little bit of an overview without going too in depth. So in a state of distress, a person feeling those feelings will generally look towards another person to help them regulate themselves, akin to when we seek warmth, when we're cold, and when we seek cooler temperatures when we're hot. So using this metaphor of this thermostat, let's consider that distressed person as needing another person to help them manage their emotional, physiological, psychological temperature. So in that dysregulated state, a person is not thinking within their coherent framework, due to the stress responses which inhibit the thinking part of the brain and actually tend to focus more in the area of fight, flight, shutdown, and that's the lower regions of the brain. So these executive functioning areas, which are about planning, consequences, considerations for security and safety when online. And we'll come to that in just a moment. So this person is going to head towards a space where they can find help, namely the internet. So they're going to Google your website, they're going to look at your social media page, on the directories, they're going to look for somebody to help them. And it's unlikely they will have considered what cybersecurity systems are in place. They're likely to make assumptions that you know what you're doing, because after all, you're the expert in the area of helping and you're currently online, so you must know. They'll reach out in voice or text format. They'll release their woes and worries and potential traumas. And this is where the disinhibition effect can actually help us understand this. And for those of you who are actually trained in trauma, you'll recognize this as the discharge of energy, content, and that need to be heard and validated. And often this occurs very fast and usually in one moment, one session. It's like a purge. So what can we do as practitioners? Well, we can learn how to provide a secure, private, safe space for people to contact us. And that begins with emails, contact forms, and more. I'll share information below about the top 10 tips. And I'm not going to cover that here, though for me, that's the primary area for us all to look at first. I'm not covering the aspects of cybersecurity here, but it will allow you, if you manage those areas, to enable you to feel confident, comfortable in the provision of your service, which then means you can focus and concentrate on the following. So this is about how to conduct trauma-informed video work with a theoretical underpinning. When providing video work, you are, and I'm going to use the word intrusive here, you are intruding, moving into a person's house, home, office, digs, wherever it is. And there might be a number of factors that you've not considered before for either you or the receiver of the service. So let's consider how this works in the corporeal, the real world. And then we can transition to the online space. So in an everyday setting, I have a practice room where my therapy clients come to see me, set time, set day during the week, my building's set up for the service. The way I introduce each week's session follows the same pattern, and clients tend to have the same arrival, departure time, pretty much a ritual, and we have the same format. Using online mediums changes this by the lead-in time to the session doesn't follow the same route. And much of the time, the sessions are taking place in a location that the client or person deems as a safe space for them. So that might be their bedroom, their kitchen, wherever. And then that can suddenly feel really intrusive, because the visual rush of information that happens on that session, that first session, can leave a vulnerable person feeling exposed as the provider's eyes, which we all do, scan the background, taking in the colour of the wall, the pictures, the furniture, and it also happens in return. So you can be left as the professional feeling as though you're being checked out, which is often the truth. The traumatized, stressed, anxious individual is looking for those cues. If they've met you before or they've been to your practice room, they're looking for those similarities between that routine. They're looking for that environment and this session. You can learn more about this in setting up your practice online, and I'm not here to teach you how to do online work. However, it's these mechanisms that are occurring on an unconscious level that I want to talk to you about, and they're the primary ones for us to focus on. So to keep it simple, there's 2 or 3 theories which will take much longer than I have time, much longer than I have time for here. So to be succinct, a person with a stress response will be looking for a face to regulate them. So this is what Stephen Porges calls the safe and social system. And primarily, this will be looked for by the dysregulated person via a video medium. So given that videos can freeze, pixelate, and be out of sync with the audio, we need to remember that just because it looks okay on our screen doesn't necessarily mean it's okay at the other end. And that can be even more dysregulating. So that can actually feel as that it's, so we need to consider the function of audio also. And when there's a break in the transmission, we can mishear, not hear, or misconstrue what somebody said at the other end. So where technology has improved over the years, and those glitches that I just just played about with. They don't tend to happen as often, but over the years, the bandwidth was potentially not equipped to deal with this COVID traffic. And this is a little bit like the motorway of wellness video that I've done with the traffic. And this glitch in the traffic is out of our control. We're at the mercy of technology, and this should be respected and then conveyed to those we are talking with. We all know how frustrating it is to be speaking with somebody, and more than once you have to ask them, you know, what did I say? What did you say? And that can fit that kind of repetitive, we're not being listened to, it leaves us feeling unheard and disconnected. So thinking about the actual technology itself, working with people who are traumatized, this can actually be quite evocative in terms of what it actually does when we're having a conversation. We need to consider our distance to the screen, and this is crucial also. So to bring up the biological imprinting attachment section of my theory, the 30-40 centimetre proposition that I have of connection through a device can help and it can hinder. So just to give a quick overview, my theory talks about the very first time that we feel safety as an infant is generally post-birth, 30 to 40 centimetres from the caregiver's face. There's usually lots and lots of regulatory cues, and this eye distance, this innate distance that we're at is generally 30 to 40 centimetres. And it turns out through a lot of the ophthalmology literature that actually this is the distance most of us sit from our screens, devices, etc., etc. And I'm kind of suggesting that proposition puts us into a place where biology is more important than cognitive issues, our thinking and so on. So we are looking at traumatized people want to be close, but the video format can actually feel intrusive, like that biological other who's smothering or suffocating in their distance. So we don't do this in the corporeal world often, and when we're close to that recipient, the client, the child, the patient, whoever, we sense and feel their energy with neuroception. We work with our proximity. Now, this can be difficult to judge if your awareness in somatic responses is dampened, naive, or non-existent. Biology does trump cognitive inhibitions or disinhibitions, and you might find that the client, patient, person becomes reactive to you on the other side of the screen based on your movements, your distance, your behaviours. So paying attention to what you do with your face and body is paramount when working with trauma online. So just going back to that technical freeze, if you're looking confused, surprised, taken aback, and that's the point at which the video freezes, this is about thinking about what impact will that have on the person that I'm speaking to or I've just asked a question of. You can also feel like a giant on the screen, and it can be very foreboding, excessive to the recipient, depending on what device they're using. So for example, if they're using an iPhone and you're on FaceTime, you're actually very close. Now, bearing in mind what that must feel like for a client, we have to consider our distance and what we're doing. But also one of the next aspects that I want to kind of introduce you to is what's called convergent vision. So I don't want to go too deep into this. However, we are focusing on a screen, and what this does is it actually brings our vision in and quite focused on that screen. Now, to keep it simple, convergent vision is used when we're tracking. So this is all about your eye saccades, and especially in dangerous situations, it's how we focus on what could be prey or predator. And this in itself is that mechanism into the fight-flight system. So just imagine for a moment that you're tracking something. Your eyes are going to become the main focus of the video conversation. And if you're in convergent focus and your client person is in convergent focus, just imagine what it is that they're actually paying attention to. and imagine what it is that you're paying attention to. So, you know, what you have to be aware of as that practitioner is your bodily response, your breathing, what's going on with different parts of your body. You know, for example, I talk a lot with my hands, and that can feel very foreboding if I start to wave them around in front of the screen. So you have to imagine what's being evoked in that recipient and their response. And it's about having that dual role. Quite often what I think Cosolino calls the shuttle up, shuttle down. So as we're intruding into that safe space, we are moving into the client's biology, psychology, and physical location before we even begin to provide our services online and doing whatever service it is. So many of the world have access to the internet. It's currently about 50%. I think it's 4.2 billion, and there's nearly 8 billion people on the planet. So, you know, we are looking at 50% of the world who do engage in video format. So just to be aware that not everybody can access, not everybody does access the internet. So there's a lot of people engaging in video chats, and how many of us actually recognize our biology has a huge part to play here. You might have seen an article that talks about Zoom fatigue, but again, it mainly focuses on those cognitive aspects. It's talking about we're on camera, we recognize that we're being watched. And I want to highlight, actually, those with trauma may well have these dissociative states. And if you've read anything by Fruin and Lanius, you'll know about trauma-related altered states of consciousness. Now, for those who have these dissociative states, they may well be watching themselves on camera, because you'll notice when you talk online that there's usually a little video of yourself, and they may not be recognizing who they are. So that's going to feel really, really discombobulating, because there's now 3 people in a 2-person meeting, if this makes sense. We have the I that's talking to the therapist, the I that I can see in the corner on the camera that may not be the I that I recognize, and then there's the therapist themselves. So bearing in mind, as therapists, we're not usually looking, well, I know some people are struggling to not look at themselves when they carry out video work. This is about what we can and can't do in terms of that recognition of self and other, and how difficult that might be for people with a trauma response, trauma history, and for those that feel like suddenly there's now somebody watching them talk, and it seems to be in synchrony. So there's lots and lots of levels of trauma related work that we need to kind of consider here. We really need to acknowledge biology and video conferencing calls, especially where trauma is concerned, trumps the cognitive. So it trumps that psychology for a lot of us. So I saw Stephen Porges reflecting on a video that what we could do is we might say to the recipient, would you like to turn off their camera? Would you like us to turn off ours? And I'm sure many of us will recognize and know that clients who feel disempowered may not be able to say no. And some of them may feel like a rabbit in the headlights. They may not be able to understand how to turn the camera off. They may not know how to regulate it. And as therapists, we need to be very, very focused on what we're doing. One of the things to consider is, if I turn my camera off, how do you know I'm not reading something or paying attention? And this is where vocal and audio cues become really, really important. So if you read around the safe and social system, you'll recognize that audio is very, very important as well. So just because we don't have cameras switched on doesn't mean that we can't engage in trauma-informed video work or telephone work. This is just to recognize that there's lots and lots of different aspects here. And this is just kind of like a primer for you to really get your thinking. Yeah, it's really to get your thinking going about what it is that you do online, particularly with trauma. And understanding actually that neuroception is about how we kind of energetically tune in about what's safe and what's not safe in terms of our autonomic nervous system. And quite often visual cues, perception trumps proprioception. So this is about where we are in the world, our visual system is heightened, And right now, for a lot of people who are having trauma responses, their visual systems are extremely heightened. So we need to acknowledge the high level of polyvagal processes. Our eyes are the control center for much of what's going on at the moment. So that then means that you must acknowledge people with sight and sound issues when you are conducting online sessions. So whilst technology is fantastic, we've got to acknowledge the transition of our bodies into the virtual space. And this traverse was never designed with, technology was never designed with biology in mind, and traverses into this space can often leave us denying or omitting those very primal responses, which is perhaps why some of us are comfortable, uncomfortable, some of us are struggling, some of us feel that this is something that we have to do, or we've got to provide the services because our clients are struggling, our patients are struggling, we've got to conduct trauma related interviews such as those by the CPS. And actually this is one of those current climates about us really regulating ourselves before we decide to go, I'm going to say jumping online and conducting processes where we haven't got enough thought and consideration behind what it is that we're doing if we're not trained in online mediums. And for many of the online counselling courses, this aspect that I'm talking to you about today is not part of that training either. So this is something that I do. And I acknowledge that much of it is it's still brand new. So I'm aware that trauma-informed video work is a new area, and it's probably going to take some time to put into practice to make it very robust and workable for a lot of people. So right now we're in this process where it is discombobulated, it is anxiety provoking for a lot of people, and it may not be as helpful as we first considered. So this was just to really get your thinking juices going, and this is to say that we're not all, we need to be patient. We need to be patient with those on the other side. We need to be patient with ourselves. We need to acknowledge that technology is not the be all and end all of everything. And any questions that you've got, please do get in contact. Hopefully this has been helpful for you. I will be running courses on technology and therapy again later on this year. That's something that I do from this biological perspective rather than a theoretical cognitive framing of use this technology. I also talk about ethics, the law, and much more in that realm. But please, if you want to learn more about me and this area, it's catherineknibbs.co.uk, and you can contact me there. There's an email button that you can click, and thank you very much for your time.